There comes a time when leftist insanity simply goes over 9,000. And when that happens, all we're left with is to read, shake our heads, and just laugh. Or cry in despair, whichever comes first. Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so several fans have suggested that I should make a series of leftist insanity over 9,000 following this video. So this is my attempt at obliging. If it goes well, I'll probably make it a more permanent feature, just like research and analysis, Freedom Alternative News, feel-good mythology, and memories from communism. Anyway, let's stop wasting time and dive into the first article. Coming from Breitbart, Spain to teach Quran in schools to counter Islamic extremism. Oh, this can be good. Quote, Spanish schools plan to tackle extremism by segregating Muslim students and teaching them more about the Quran and Islam according to new government guidelines. Critics say the guidelines, which suggest the teaching of many aspects of Islamic doctrine, culture, and history, will discourage westernization and integration, which are better ideals to promote in order to counter Islamic extremism. Gee, you think? The government quietly published the new guidelines for taxpayer-funded Islamic curriculums in public, preschools, primary schools, and secondary schools in the official state gazette, Boletín Oficial del Estado, on March 18. According to translations by the Gatestone Institute in primary schools, ages 6 to 12, the guidelines call for children to recognize Muhammad as the final prophet sent by Allah and accept him as the most important. They also encourage students to recognize Muhammad as the final prophet sent by Allah and accept him as the most important, and recognize the Quran as a guide for all humanity. The government says they will promote a moderate reinterpretation of Islam based on coexistence, diversity, equality, and human rights. However, they have agreed to allow local Muslim organizations to draft the course, choose textbooks, and even influence who teaches them. This could leave schools open to entryism by Spain's active Muslim Brotherhood factions and other Islamists. Well, gee, what a surprise. According to the guidelines, Muslim students will be allowed to opt for an hour of Islamic religion studies where they will segregate from their Christian classmates. The guidelines, therefore, could result in stirring religious fervor and promoting Islamic identity among young Muslims in Spain, suggested Soren Kern, an analyst for European politics. Mr. Kern also suggested the guidelines amount to a full-fledged Islamic studies curriculum at public schools nationwide, which could lead to more radicalization. Others, too, have suggested that less Islam rather than more is the way to promote human rights and Western values, pointing to the 100-plus references to killing infidels in the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad's bloody example. The guidelines could even be interpreted as promoting Islamic conversion over integration and the preservation of Spain's Christian and short democratic history. The demand preschool children ages 3 to 6 are to learn the Islamic profession of faith, the Shahada, which asserts that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. The Shahada being the way one becomes a Muslim, by repeating it 3 times in front of a witness. What else is there to be said, really? I mean, this is the country of Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, or El Cid. It is the country for which Christendom did the Reconquista. It is the country of the Inquisition, for crying out loud. And all for what? For a bunch of pathological cucks to just come into a bureaucracy and quite literally re-Islamize the nation using the nation's tax money. What can you say to this, really? And I looked through the original documents, and yes, I understand Spanish as well, and quite frankly, this makes Sweden look like a militant secular force in the face of Islam by comparison. I mean, seriously, teach Shahada to 3-year-olds on taxpayers' dime? What could possibly go wrong? Also, the rationale used to introduce what essentially is Islamist indoctrination is moronic per se. I mean, what does that even mean? Introduce lessons of Islamism in schools in order to prevent radicalization? How's that supposed to work? And if that's how things work, then why not introduce mandatory lessons in Mein Kampf in order to, counter the alarming rise of fascist politics in Spain and Europe at large? It's the same logic, really. And if 3-year-olds can be taught Shahada to prevent Islamic radicalization, then why shouldn't they also be told about the superiority of the Aryan man and the scourge of the Jew in order to prevent fascist radicalization? If my question sounds retarded, that's because it is, but it's no more retarded than the actual policy of the Spanish government. There's no way you can reasonably argue that teaching 3 to 6-year-olds about Shahada and encouraging them to accept Muhammad is a way to prevent radicalization. It simply doesn't follow. Now, admittedly, this in itself is not necessarily a path towards radicalization, or at least it doesn't have to be, but it is a path towards Islamization. After all, many countries of Europe maintain some sort of Christian religious education in their schools, either mandatory, such as the case of Ireland and Poland, or on various opt-in or opt-out basis. And they do so in order to preserve some sort of Christian identity. Now, whether that actually works or not is a separate topic for another day, but the same thing applies here. Leaving the Islamist organizations to draft the curricula and influence who teaches these lessons is a way to ferment and or crystallize an Islamic identity. Anyway, let's move further, but stay on the same topic. Coming from the Telegraph, Oxford theology students can skip Christianity lessons. Oh boy, this is going to be so good. Quote, "Theology students at Oxford will no longer be required to study Christianity throughout the course for the first time in 800 years after undergraduates complained about lack of diversity. Changes are being made to the degree to minor shifts in religious beliefs and culture in the wider British society, according to academics. Instead, those in second year will have the option to take papers which will include feminist approaches to religion and theology," the Times Higher Education magazine reported. Johannes Dachhuber, a professor of historical and systematic theology at the Theology Faculty's board chairman, suggested students could avoid studying Christianity altogether and instead favor subjects such as Buddhism in space and time. However, he said it was unlikely that many would choose to ignore all Christian elements of the degree. The changes had been instigated by students, of course, and lecturers, according to the academic. Professor Dachhuber said, quote, "We recognize that the people who come to study at Oxford come from a variety of different backgrounds and have legitimately different interests. They come from the respected communities of Britain. The dominance of the Church of England has been receding, but at the same time, religion hasn't disappeared. We want to offer to potential students what is interesting for them, and that has changed a lot in the last 30 years. An Oxford University spokesman said, quote, "Christianity is still compulsory the first year of the course. In fact, there are 2 compulsory papers on it. So all students on the course will still study Christianity. Christianity is still a major part of the course in second and third year, and it's very unlikely that a student would choose options that do not cover Christianity in these years." Separately, Benjamin Thompson, Associate Professor of Medieval History and Coordinator of Undergraduate History at Oxford, said that there have been similar shifts in history degrees. He told the Times Higher Education, quote, "These changes are what students want because a bigger world is affecting them. The most obvious example is the rise of militant Islam, or how well the Chinese economy is doing. With the Cecil Rhodes statue debate, this decolonialization of the curriculum is now quite interesting. As an example, he said that to study a medieval knight, students might look at his uniform and trace its origins back to the Silk Roads in the Far East, rather than just looking at history from an English perspective. Now, I'm sorry, but what is so wrong for an English university to look at things from an English perspective? No, serious question. What's so bad about that? The Japanese universities look at things from a Japanese perspective and nobody bats an eyelid. And nobody should. That's why you go to a Japanese university, to learn the Japanese perspective. Also, American students can barely locate Germany on the map and have no idea whatsoever what happens outside of the tiny bubble of the United States. They don't seem to be affected by the fact that they only learn the American perspective, which would not be a bad thing, but they learn the wrong things about the American perspective. But that's a discussion for another time. Now, going back to the article, what possible good could bring removing Christianity and replacing it with feminist approaches to religious and theology? Serious question. And mind you, I'm an atheist and I view religion with suspicion, particularly militant religion, but that's not the case of Christianity, and that's definitely not the case in Britain. Also, this is about theology degrees. How can a theology degree be relevant if one doesn't study Christianity for one's theology degree? How can one be even a sub-mediocre theologian without having studied Christianity? Now, mind you, there is something positive to be told about the introduction of feminism in the degree as well. I mean, after all, feminism is a religion, and it's about bloody time it starts being recognized as such. And, you know, what better place to start than the theology faculty at Oxford? That's all I had to say. With that being said, thank you for watching, and especially for supporting this channel. Jesus Christ, what a bunch of cucks. I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.